Hello and welcome once again to an episode of the IMMP, the Inter-Millennium Media Project podcast. My name is Matthew Porter.
And I'm Ian Porter.
I'm his dad, he's my son, and we've returned to movies again.
Yes.
We've returned to post-apocalyptic Australia.
Our road trip continues.
Yes, it does. And we're headed back to Mad Max land.
We are. Oh, this is kind of the one that it's weird. This is the one that is the most well remembered, but I don't know if it's because of anything within it.
Oh, that's interesting. You find it the most well remembered.
Yes. Kind of. I see a lot of like Mad Max fans who know the second one, The Road Warrior, better than they do the third.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of pop culture people who know the third better than they do the first or second.
I could see where that would be the case. In some ways, the third movie, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, took Mad Max out of the kind of indie film world in which the first two movies lived. This was Mad Max Goes Hollywood.
And in more ways than one.
Yes, very much.
Oh, there's some interesting things to discuss, especially now that we're into the third of a trilogy that later expanded. But I'm going to treat these as a trilogy, and how the three of them talk to each other and talk about the same sort of concepts are fascinating. But this is Beyond Thunderdome, which I will just immediately say is the most 80s title ever to 80s.
It is. It is.
It's not just like Mad Max, the cool location name. It's Mad Max, the cool location name, and so much more. Oh, goodness.
There is so much about this that is so incredibly 80s. I mean, it was released right smack in the middle of the 80s. And I mean, it stars Tina Turner. As Auntie Entity. It's got Angry Anderson as her henchman.
So many things about this. And we've got I don't know if we want to wait until we reach it in the story, but let's wait but the name itself, Beyond Thunderdome, has become iconic because of just something beyond Thunderdome, or getting beyond Thunderdome becomes a punchline for so many other things.
Or just something dome has become a big deal.
Just the dome concept. Oh, goodness. If there was an issue about how many things get dome on the end, it would become Domegate, and the sheer linguistic force of those two name combinations would implode.
So this is a movie that, in some ways, it makes a great deal of sense because it's showing the world of Mad Max some significant time after the events of The Road Warrior.
Mm-hmm.
And Max is still out there wandering the wastelands. His main goal seems to be survival. And yet he's not driving a car.
Yeah. This is a Mad Max Sans vehicle.
Right. He's got a vehicle, but it's being pulled by camels. And it's essentially he's living in a camper or a tiny home that's pulled across the desert by camels. But he doesn't keep it very long because it is taken from him by a pilot and a little kid who apparently stake out the trade routes and steal vehicles and stuff from travelers when they can.
And that's the start of where this movie really is immediately presenting its different kind of narrative, I will say.
Yes.
Because, and I'm going to get into the deep things because I want to reference all the times this happens. The first movie is an urban legend. It is the story of something in a town. It is the story of a man. He is a singular entity. He is a person with a beginning, a middle, and an end in that sense.
Oh, okay. Not an urban legend as in a supernatural story set in a modern day.
No. Yeah, no. I mean like the type of fable it is.
Okay.
Is this like story of a local man, a local hero kind of story.
Mm-hmm.
The second one has a whole lot of things I want to call high fantasy-esque.
Yeah.
What with this grand caravan, with this besieged city, with this wandering knight of a forgotten order. It is much more the classical high fantasy in a, I want to call, Tolkien-esque sense.
Hmm.
Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome is Mad Max the movie. And I mean that in it is Mad Max attempting to discuss cinematic fable. A lot
Oh.
of its moments are much more grounded in what we would consider more modern storytelling in that sense, but in a deconstructive way.
So we're kind of
If
seeing a progression of storytelling, and now we've gotten to storytelling through film, and that's the
mm,
essence of this movie is storytelling through movies.
feeling through exactly, if each of them are a different type of story humanity tells itself, we have reached the televised age
Okay.
in the Mad Max way.
Yeah.
And immediately, just what we see here, this establishing shot and this pulling the man down to nothing and stripping him, not just of his vehicle, but as he gets into Bartertown, of all the weapons, of all these things, is so much more deliberately set up in some ways and so much more visually establishing in ways that I found fascinating, coming from that perspective of if this is a fable, how is this telling us this part? And by seeing everything he loses, we see everything he has to gain back so much more clearly.
Yeah, and that is the central drive that starts this off is he's apparently doing okay traveling around with the few possessions he has and a monkey that he's got. And
yeah, the monkey's just kind of an oddity.
With his camels and his wagon, and he loses all of that. So you're right. It becomes getting that back, getting back to where he was, not solving anybody else's problems, just getting back to where he was in terms of his survival capability. That's his goal, at least initially.
Yes.
And that's a pretty compelling goal.
It's a compelling goal, and it setting up this kind of establishing him as this character who surprises and is bigger in some ways than all the other people around him.
Right.
Max has become a little bit more than just a man. He's starting to become this legendary hero in that sense. He's starting to be protagonist just by being.
Yes, but it's hard to say he's legendary when really nobody's heard of him.
Yes.
And there's not a lot of travel and not a lot of shared stories across distance. So it's hard to be a legend under those circumstances. We see that by the end of the movie, he's clearly become a legend, kind of the way he had for a different group of people by the end of The Road Warrior.
Yeah.
But he starts out as somebody who is unknown and easy to underestimate.
And he wanders with nothing to his name now to Bartertown.
Oh, and it's got to be acknowledged that the pilot who takes all of his stuff.
Oh, yes.
And his kid, the pilot, Jedediah, is played by Bruce Spence, who played the gyro captain in The Road Warrior. And
yes,
Jedediah Jr. is played by Adam Cockburn, who played the feral kid in The Road Warrior.
Which that also adds to the little bit of how much is actually continuing. Does Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome actually start a actual physical time after The Road Warrior? Or are we getting stories about a man later?
Yeah.
That's where the fable and the legend part also comes in, where there's parts of even the first Mad Max that feel like they are told after the fact. Like we're being told the origin, or we're being told stories of this one person at different places. But the edges between them and where one becomes the other is so fuzzy. They start to look like versions of each other. A man wanders into a town. He is proven to be strong. the leadership has its issues,
Mhm.
and as it starts to fall apart, he saves the people, saves some, brings justice to others, and leaves.
Yeah, they're different stories, and yet we want them to have the same structure. So in every story, he starts out as a nobody that no one knows and ends as a legend. And he starts
Mm-hmm.
again. There's something about this. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but I tend to think of it as the pipe down kid school of continuity.
Yeah.
It's like, you're telling a story and you start out with, well, he's wandering the wasteland and he has nothing. But Grandpa, I thought he had all this stuff and all these people who knew him because of his past adventures. Quiet kid, you want a story or not? and you're right. We have to start at that same place. We have to go to that same place. And what's different is the story that gets him from nobody to legend.
Yes. I will say, of all of the places we've seen, even from the first Mad Max, Bartertown and Underworld are some of the best fleshed out. And they kind of do imply a counter to what we were just describing, where the level of advancement and the level of ingenuity and repair that we see, the amount of societal reconstruction is greater every movie.
It is. And I think are interesting reasons behind that. It's as if by the time of Beyond Thunderdome, people have given up on the world that was.
Yes.
In Mad Max, the police force was attempting to preserve what was left of the world, keep it from completely disappearing, of civilization. In The Road Warrior, there was this idea that everything is not lost. We can hold on to and bring back something of what we knew. If we only had the gasoline, if we only could travel to where we need to go, everything will be fine because we can get back to the way things were. By the time Beyond Thunderdome comes along, by the time this story is set, it's clear that's never going to happen.
Yes.
And some people have decided we can't look back. We have to build something new starting from where we are. And that's what Tina Turner's character, Anti-Entity, has done in creating Bartertown.
It's a place of trade. It's a city with lights.
It's a city with rules and laws.
With rules and laws. And it is a city that invites all as long as you can give something.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, as its name suggests, you can get something if you can give something. And Max comes in with nothing and kind of proves that what he can give is physical force.
Yes.
And like, I can put in effort and I can beat up any guy you throw at me.
He's got, and it's not just force, it's skill. He has skills that he's honed. Some of them from his training and experience as a police officer, some of them based upon his experience in survival. And even that is kind of discounted by some of the folks in Bartertown until they realize he might be useful for a very particular purpose that they've got in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because you mentioned the other part of Bartertown, which is Underworld.
Underworld. The entire system of infrastructure that helps Bartertown run. The food and the fuel are the giant subterranean pig farms and refineries of Underworld, making and burning methane gas.
And that's what everything runs on, is methane.
Yes.
And that's the world of Master Blaster, who control Underworld. And there's this tension between Anti-Entity, who is the governor and lawgiver and the person everyone looks to maintain order, and the fact that none of this would be possible without the energy that is provided by Master Blaster and Underworld.
Mm-hmm. And there's this intense, not rivalry, but this intense back and forth between them. As Master of Master Blaster, the dwarf who rides around on Blaster, his giant bodyguard, they make deals, they cause embargoes that shut down the power above. And what Anti-Entity wants is, I need you to kill Blaster so that Master is less powerful and has to listen.
Right. We need his knowledge, but we have to get rid of Blaster so that we can control Master.
And it is a little fast paced here, but the answer is that they need to send Max down into the underworld to work so that he can get the information. And while there, he finds his old vehicle and he learns information about how to fight them, but I forget how the actual fight gets started.
Well, I want to back up a little bit.
Okay.
Just to talk a little bit more about the tone of this movie, because this is another key way in which this differs from the previous two movies, even more so than parts of The Road Warrior. This movie is funny.
This is, you're right.
There's humor in this movie. When the powers that be in Bartertown decide, well, let's check out this guy, see if he's good for this special mission we've got, taking out Blaster. He has to go through the entry, kind of the port of entry for Bartertown, and he has to check all of his weapons and leave them behind. And there's this long scene where he is pulling weapon after weapon, and he's got so many guns and knives and everything you can imagine. Every time you think it's going to stop, he reaches for a different set of pockets or the other boot and pulls out more stuff, to the point where the other characters are watching and saying, "Are you for real?"
Yes.
And there's another scene, I think it's towards the beginning there as well, where someone challenges him and he pulls out his trademark sawed-off shotgun and doesn't shoot the guy, just shoots the weird dealy bopper headdress the guy's wearing.
Yes.
And the way the guy just deflates, like, yeah, I liked that hat. You shot my hat.
My hat. Yes, the you shot my hat face.
But
just
that's
because he takes it off and he pets what's remaining off of the fringe of his hat, like, oh, they're there.
And that does two things. It establishes the kind of reflexes Max has and still has, but it's just funny the way it's shot, the way it's presented.
Yes.
And there's a lot of that in this movie. This movie isn't afraid to be funny. It isn't afraid to be emotional and sentimental and dramatic, but it's not afraid to be funny. And to some extent, it doesn't take itself as seriously as the smaller indie movies sometimes seem to have to take themselves.
Yes. That is definitely an aspect where it's like the level of, like, it gets away with its drama and it still has its violent fight scenes.
Oh, no question.
But I want to say they are tempered overall by the fact that there is that comedy moment, by the fact that level of unreality is emphasized.
Mm-hmm. And it helps maintain the tension that we go from humorous scenes like that to some of these action scenes. Not long after what we just talked about, Max meets Anti-Entity, finds out what this job is, and if he takes out a Blaster, they'll supply him with a vehicle and fuel and food and water, whatever he needs.
Mm-hmm.
He'll make that deal. But before he gets to that point, he's shown in to meet Anti-Entity, and then he's attacked by everybody around. And he does not, I don't think he kills any of the attackers, even though they're using lethal force against him, but he evades all of them and takes all of them out of commission until...
I thought the harpist dies.
Oh, you might be right, because of, like, he redirects somebody else's shot or something like that. You're right. It's not a bloodless fight. But that was the audition. They've tried to get other people to do this, and none of them survived the audition. I guess the idea being, if you can't survive 4 guys attacking you in here, you're not going to survive if you go up against Blaster.
Right.
But once he passes the audition and makes the deal, the way to take out Blaster is to pick a fight.
Yep.
So he waits until that night, and Master Blaster are riding around on Max's vehicle, which they bought or bartered from the pilot, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And Max says, essentially, "That's mine, give it back," and starts a fight. Because there's one way fights are settled in Bartertown.
And I want to stop before there, because there's something on the idea of this being Mad Max discussing movies and TV and our cinema narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And we see something interesting, which I want to compare, which is Anti-Entity has this grand spot above everything else with these antennas on top that can broadcast out in these speakers.
Yep.
She's got this ethereal floating vibe. There's this little bit of like classy, like luxury still going on for her.
Right. She has water and fruit and everything she needs, and she's literally looking over and supervising the entire town.
And she describes having these big, grand plans, these far-reaching ideas. And it took me a little bit to click it in my mind. But she became, in my mind, the representation of being the studio.
Oh.
Meanwhile, when we get down into Underworld, Master Blaster is this rough and dangerous person, but he talks about all the technical aspects of everything going on. They understand what is and how it does. They're this crew and this industry behind it. And so in this story about art and our narratives in our media, we've got industry and studio fighting each other and being two inescapable from each other parts of the whole. And it started making me realize, it's like, oh, there's this, like, if the crew goes on strike, the studio doesn't have an idea. But without the things the studio is bringing in, the crew doesn't have anything to work towards. They have to work with each other. And so, like, this little bit of an inkling of a metaphor the entire thing had sunk its teeth in on this viewing for me, and I wanted to share that as it grows because it's not done growing yet.
I like that. So she is Warner Brothers, but
Yes.
but Master Blaster are the director George Miller and the Dean Semier, the director of photography, and all the people who actually hands-on make the movie work.
Exactly.
I like that.
And so this also makes this odd, like, oh, that's mine. You stole my idea of fight aspect. Such an interesting thing. And it leads into the wildly cinematic element that is Thunderdome. Because Thunderdome is weaponized. I'm just going to call it now. Thunderdome and the entire legal structure of Bartertown is weaponized game show.
Oh, no question. They make
no
that.
question. They make that so brilliantly clear. Because Thunderdome, as the pop cultural osmosis was probably let all of our audience know, has a simple rule. 2 men enter, 1 man leaves.
Yes. And you've got Dr. Dealgood, who we've seen before as the auctioneer, but he's also the MC and game show host for Thunderdome, and he's welcoming people to another edition of Thunderdome.
Thunderdome, exactly.
We've got 2 guys with a dispute. We know the rules. We solve things here. And he has this really interesting speech about what Thunderdome represents.
Mm-hmm.
And spinning this in a very positive way, because he talks about people, to summarize his speech, people always have disputes. And what happened in the old world was arguing got to fighting, and fighting got to warring, and now the world is blown up and we're worried about hard rain and everything we knew is gone. We're going to do things differently. People have a dispute, it's settled here and it ends here.
Mm-hmm.
2 men enter, 1 man leaves.
1 man leaves.
And that is almost a scripture or a sutra. This mantra of 2 men enter, 1 man leaves. And
when the audience starts, and the audience starts chanting it.
Yes.
But there is this very much like, we saw this, the world getting angrier and still having this fighting in the previous one. Mm-hmm. And this is a town that has built itself on putting all of that fight in one place so that it doesn't show up anywhere else.
Right. They're not only giving up on the idea of bringing back the world that was, they're trying to spot the problems with the world that was and avoid them. And this is one of their ways of avoiding them. Mm-hmm. Wisely or not, this is a way of keeping fights contained, because fights are always going to be.
And of course, 2 men enter. You can't have Master and Blaster. So it's just Blaster versus Max.
Right. And
And I
Blaster
will
is
want
huge and has this iron helmet and, almost twice Max's weight.
Yes. And Thunderdome itself is just a wild gladiatorial arena. It is two men hooked to bungee harnesses that are strapped to the ceiling in, those kids, like circular, like a dome jungle gyms? It's like an oversized adult version of those bungee harnesses, and the walls are covered in weapons. Oh my goodness, this is a dungeon master's like dream location idea wise. This feels like it was cooked up in the middle of a head cold as the NyQuil kicked in. What was George Miller thinking? It's brilliant.
And the only rules are the 2 men enter, 1 man leaves. Get to a weapon, take out your opponent.
Yeah. But there is a little bit of, since the audience is watching, there's a love of when it is not quick or simple, when the fight has something going. It is entertainment as much as it is law.
Right. It is law, it is liturgy, and it is entertainment.
Mm-hmm. But Max has a secret weapon.
Yes.
Because he saw something when he was down in Underworld for a bit, setting up to pick this fight. He learns that Blaster is sensitive to sound. And so he's constantly trying to fight with a whistle, trying to get it and get a chance to blow it so that he can disable Blaster and take him down.
And fortunately, they do set this up early as he's picking up possessions of his that the monkey is throwing out of the wagon as it's being stolen. One of them is this little bosun's whistle. And
Yeah.
he keeps that handy and realizes that's valuable. And that extends the fight in Thunderdome into this long, varied action scene where they're bouncing around on the bungees and they're getting weapons and cutting through the bungees, and a lot of reversals back and forth as to who has the advantage with what weapon. And some of this is almost slapstick. You've got Blaster chasing Max in circles around Thunderdome because Max is just carrying a dead chainsaw while Blaster has a big blade. And then Max gets the chainsaw started, so the fight goes the other direction, and he's chasing Blaster.
And I will say, it is refreshing, even for how old this movie is, it is refreshing to see a wire work fight scene where the wires are diegetic.
Yes.
And like I got tangled in my own harness is an actual plot point of danger,
Yes.
and not cut, retake the shoot. I love that.
And they draw this out as much as they can with Max getting enough of an advantage that it's time to use the whistle, and then dropping the whistle and then having to find it again. And another action beat leads him within a reach of the whistle, and then he's pulled away from it. That's almost stretched out too much, but not quite too much. It works.
Yeah. But the end of the battle, Max defeats Blaster, and he feels too much sympathy having fought this man. He sees that there's this man. It's actually more like a young child.
Yeah, Blaster's helmet is knocked off in the fight, and now that he sees Blaster is maybe very big and very strong, but he's clearly intellectually handicapped.
Yes.
And he is somebody who does not have really the understanding of what's happening, of what's going on. And Max can't bring himself to kill this man, because even though he made this deal with Anti-Entity to do so, even though the rules of Thunderdome are there's only one survivor.
So he calls out that this wasn't the deal.
Right. And this shows, as much as Max is a survivor, as much as Max would like to think of himself as only out for himself and as a survivor, he has points at which he cannot do what would be necessary to survive. The easiest thing for him to do would be to kill Blaster, take his reward from Anti-Entity and leave. But he can't bring himself to do that.
Yeah. But revealing this causes issues.
Right. He not only has broken the rules of Thunderdome, but he gives away the fact that he made a deal with Anti-Entity to kill Blaster.
Mm-hmm.
And that everybody thinks is a little sketchy.
But the bigger issue is that he refuses to fulfill the deal.
That's right. You can say the deal was moral or not, just or not, but it was a deal. He and Anti-Entity shook on it, and he's breaking the deal.
And deals are sacred in Bartertown.
There's another mantra they've got.
Bust a deal, face the wheel.
This is like the special bonus round of their game show.
Yes, which results in I love the wheel. The wheel is one of the wildest props in all of Mad Max because it is this uneven, absolutely somebody was watching Wheel of Fortune, because this is exactly what it is. It's this wedged wheel with an indicator that is spun. It looks like it's made out of an old children's like manual merry-go-round or something.
It's been cobbled together from that in a welding shop somewhere. And it's worth slowing this down and seeing all of the different possibilities on this wheel. They include acquittal. It's not a big wedge, but it includes acquittal.
I've got the list here.
Oh, good.
It's okay. Gulag, acquittal, hard labor, spin again, forfeit goods, death, underworld, amputation, life imprisonment, Auntie's choice.
So bust a deal, face the wheel. And again, we get all the audience chanting this along with Dr. Dealgood.
Yes. And Dr. Dealgood has an entire other little speech at the front of the wheel too, as Max is led out in chains. Interestingly enough, he gets gulag on the wheel, but that is apparently become Bartertown's word for banishment.
Right. Well, it's more than just banishment because he's bound and put on a horse or a donkey, and it's driven out into the desert.
Yeah, he's put on a horse backwards with a mascot head on him.
Oh yes, this giant
and no
paper
goods.
mache head.
Yeah, and sent off into the desert. And I'm just looking. It's like, do you have a supply of horses and paper mache heads? Bartertown is doing better than I thought. This is interesting.
Very odd.
Very odd.
I mean, it's essentially death by desert is the sentence, but they've made it festive? I don't know.
Yeah. Insert Five Nights at Freddy's soundtrack.
That would have fit.
It would have fit. The big mascot head going on, but Max is able to wiggle his way free before something under the sand eats the horse.
Right, because eventually the horse falls over out of exhaustion, which I guess is part of that, how this is supposed to work.
Yeah, I guess the only thing you've got is what the horse is. I guess,
Yeah. There's a lot of loose quicksand type sand flows in this desert. It'll swallow this horse. But he manages to evade that, and yet he's out there with no water.
And he starts wandering, but collapses and is found soon after by a young kid.
Right. This mysterious figure, goggles and head wrapping and a long staff, but finds him and takes him somewhere.
Calling out to others with a signaling. And he arrives to a tribe of kids.
Yes. They take him and he wakes up and he's in this canyon with a river and
green plants.
Yes, green plants and fruit trees and a whole bunch of kids ranging from toddlers to, middle teenage years.
And they are so excited to see him.
And
he's welcome. Yeah, he's welcome to planet Earth.
Yes, I finded him.
I finded him. This is where some of the little bit of linguistic drift we heard with Guzzolene, which I take it was just an Australianism already. But the linguistic drift is strong here. The language get chopped up and mix around.
And from these kids, we get this shift into a whole different kind of world building.
Yes.
because they keep calling him Captain Walker.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew you'd come back, Captain Walker. We've been ready for you. We've been keeping the records straight, and we've been ready to go. And just to prove that we've kept it straight, we'll tell you the story. And they tell the story of how they came to be there.
But how did you tell the story in this narrative? You have a box on a stick with two little antenna sticks on top.
They've painted things on the walls to show the story, but to show the sequence, they use this little TV-like frame to show picture after picture. It's this slight bits of memory of the way things used to be, and this sort of cargo cultish way to try to capture that in what they have and how they can tell stories.
And this is this other part of like, this is where it really sinks in. Like, this is about that story changing, but still being presented via the medium.
Right.
This is, I don't know exactly what they are. Are they audience? Are they artists? Are they potential? But they are part of this little conversation about this concept of discussions of how we tell stories, because they are using the format so clearly. It is so baked into how they tell it.
Right.
But we learn of the plane that their families had been on crashing. We learn of Captain Walker, the pilot of the plane, being this leader of the group as they got themselves together in this canyon. And we learn of the adults heading out to try to find something and then come back when they know it's safe to get the kids.
And they have never come back.
And it's really vague how long that's been, but it's not been short.
It's not been short, but there's only so many years it could have been.
Yeah.
Because the youngest of the children there must already have been born.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been at least a few years. Because there are kids who might be 6 or 7 or so, maybe a little bit older are the youngest. So it's not clear, but that's a long time. If when the adults left, the oldest were barely 10 years old.
Yeah.
This was, you look after your baby sister, we'll be back soon. And then 8 years later, however many years, the adults are not back.
Yeah, that's a good point. But the kids expect that they'll be able to, now fly in the machine to Tomorrowland.
Yes.
Which is just a Viewmaster of pictures of cities.
That's right. In addition to their cave paintings, they've got Viewmaster slides of various places.
I do want to know what that slide reel is called.
I get the impression it was cobbled together from a few different ones.
Mm-hmm. Just city shots of different things, but they're wonderfully interesting. And seeing these little bits of like concepts without context gaining this power and mythology to them is so fascinating.
And the kids have also taken some of the things they've got. There's radio equipment from the plane, and they've turned it into a breastplate that one of them wears with fake headphones that they've put together. They've got a record album, an LP that they've suspended between strings that they can spin. So spinning this LP and flipping switches on the radio breastplate that he's wearing and trying to talk into his headset, because that's how you communicate. That's how Captain Walker used to communicate way back when we were on the plane. So this must be how you communicate with Captain Walker.
And you watch and you can see the little pieces of their society, of the leader, but the kid with the record is almost this like monk.
Yes, he's like
holding the cleric of this bunch, holding this religious artifact and reciting this prayer.
Right.
That becomes this like, Roger, over. Can you read me, Roger? Like this, like, the same sort of little pieces he can remember turning into this thing with a power and meaning beyond what it was.
And there's interesting parallels between what we see during that storytelling among the kids and what we saw in Bartertown, because there are certain points in the story where all the kids chime in to emphasize a special phrase in this story that you get the impression that they tell this story for one another constantly so that they keep the reckoning straight. And these important phrases that need to be underlined, they all join in on, just like everybody in Bartertown would chant, 2 men enter, 1 man leaves.
Yeah.
It was
There's
this
some
importance of a common story to rebuilding anything, be it Bartertown or being this society the kids have kind of cobbled together for themselves.
yeah, there's something universal that the youngest and the oldest are all in that same mindset that,
Mhm.
it takes something of this sort of mind and mentality to survive in general. But Max does not want to give these kids false hope.
No, he
So
he
he keeps dismissing, he keeps denying.
keeps trying to explain that he's not Captain Walker. There's no going home. There's no home to go to. This is you've got like the best place there is to live. You're going to stay here. We're all going to stay here, and we're going to be thankful for it. And they don't want that because they have had a mission for literally as long as they can remember. And now there's possibly a
Yeah.
chance to do something about it, a chance to go to the home they can only imagine. And there's this great shot where we see the plane is still there, like on the other side of the canyon and out
Yes.
in the desert. And the kids all climb up on top of the plane and say, "We're ready, Captain Walker. Time to get skyward."
Like they'll fly it on the top like it's a dragon or something.
Yes.
And no. And it's interesting. Half of them listen and understand and they're saddened, but they go back home, and the other half get angry.
Right. He has added imbalance to what had been a very balanced society because now there are factions, those who want to stay and they'll believe the guy they thought was Captain Walker, and people who think, well, he was able to get from somewhere to here on foot. We can get somewhere on foot. It's better than staying here.
And in the fight between these two, as one group steals a bunch of supplies to go off on foot, but doesn't know the dangers between here and there, and the other half tries to hold up and continue to use the resources they have, they both are ruined in this conflict. And Max has to fix what he broke in some ways.
He attempts to keep the group that wants to leave, keep them from leaving, and he does so by force. He knocks out the girl who is leading them and ties them up and just won't let them leave because he knows they'll die out there in the desert. The best case scenario is they make it as far as Bartertown, and then Bartertown kills them. But then they escape. There's one character who is the outsider among all of these, the guy they call Screwloose, who paints his face and lives up in his own little alcove with strange bits of art around him. And I'm not entirely sure why, but he sneaks in at night and let's go the people who want to leave, and they leave.
Mm-hmm. He's kind of this dissident watcher of the entire group,
Right.
who comes down not in a I support the people trying to leave, but in a they should have the right to choose to.
Right. If the kid with the radio stuff is the official and accepted priest or cleric of the group, he is the mystic on the mountain who nobody quite understands, but who seems to know things and see things no one else does.
Yes, that is exactly what. But now that everything has been upended in one way or another, they've got to do something. So Max leads the group to Bartertown, because at least if he's arriving with them, they might be able to do something. And he doesn't know the state Bartertown is in since he left it.
Right. He sets out with a few of the strongest people from the canyon with as much water as they can carry and finds the kids. And the kids are just about to die in one of those sand slips that we saw consume the horse earlier. So yeah, he was
saves
right.
their
One
lives.
of the dangers that he predicted almost kills them and would have killed them had he not shown up.
But now they can't go back really in time.
Right.
So they head on over and they find a Bartertown that is collapsing as well in its own way.
Yes
Kind
and
of.
no. It's now
Yes
that
and no.
and we hadn't made this clear when Max refused to kill Blaster, Anti-Entity's people did. So now Anti-Entity is in control of Master and forcing him to keep the energy running. But it's not going as smoothly, you're right, as it had been before.
Yeah.
Even though there was that tension between Anti-Entity and Master Blaster, it was a tension that worked. There was a certain amount of balance there, and now that balance is gone. It's all about societies being thrown out of balance now that I think about it.
It is. Master knew what the requirements were, and he would shut things down out of pettiness, but he would also shut and regulate things out of necessity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And putting him off to the side where he can be made an example of and made lesser means that they're losing the valuable information, and it's harder to get the information they need and harder to get things working and running.
Right.
And so even though she has more power and she's attempting to grow and make her grand plans for Bartertown come to life, they are hiccuping and faltering as the infrastructure underneath can't support what she is trying to do.
And when Max and the kids get to Bartertown, they go through one of the tunnels that leads directly into the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not 100% sure I understand why that is. I know they need supplies and things that they can only get from Bartertown because the rest, everything surrounding it is empty wilderness, empty desert. But are they trying to just get some stuff while avoiding Anti-Entity because she still has it out for Max? It seems like they want Master. Do they want to get him and take him somewhere because of his knowledge? It's not clear why they go in where they do and what they're trying to do.
It's not quite clear. I take it that after having had to give up all of his stuff before, Max might be avoiding the fact that Bartertown demands, what can you give me? He's trying to do that because it's not like the kids could give anything.
He wouldn't be allowed to just walk in if people recognized him, I guess.
Right. So he's trying to sneak in this way, hoping because the resources, the industry, the tools are down below. Maybe he can find something useful. Maybe he can grab a vehicle and get it back to the kids, and maybe find someone who can do something to help about the plane.
And maybe that's part of it. Almost as soon as they go in, he's telling the kids there's this small man that we need to find, and we need to get him and bring him out. And maybe it is that, well, he's got knowledge that would be useful in some way. Or that would be leverage against Anti-Entity, and we can barter him back in exchange for vehicles and fuel.
And there's a little bit also of sympathy of Max feels bad for what he did to Blaster. And there's a little bit maybe of, I owe something getting Master to this better place.
And as bad a character as Master had been, he's being horribly abused now that he doesn't have the protection of Blaster.
We also did see that in a weird way, Master was, well, not a weird way, Master was shown to be a father to Blaster.
Yes.
And so you also get I have a bunch of kids. Who's the one person I've seen be a good dad in the entirety of this? I've got a guy with technical skill and and at least a little bit of parenting. I have a broken plane and a lot of kids I can't handle on my own. Help me. There's a couple of reasons. It's a weird answer, but it's true.
I'm trying to figure out how I feel about you seeing Master from Beyond Thunderdome as an example of good fatherhood.
I didn't say good. I said best we've seen.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
There's not a lot of good parenting anywhere. He's the best we saw so far.
Very good point. Something you might make note of in our discussion of this movie so far, except for the vehicle that Max was driving, towed by camels, there have been no vehicles, really. No cars, no car chases, no running highway battles, no highways in this Mad Max movie. It's been all about combat and politics and stories, like you were pointing out earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Not about high-speed fighting.
Yeah, it's not the same.
That changes, though.
Time to fix that.
Yes, we can do something about that. It is a Mad Max movie. You eventually need a George Miller high-speed highway type battle.
And you know what that's excellent for? An escape from Bartertown.
Yes. Because something that was seen earlier was kind of the main boiler apparatus in the underworld is actually a locomotive.
Yeah.
It's stationary but parked on train tracks there in the middle of the methane energy complex.
And so they hop those train tracks and they race down them. And I think I don't know if it was the locomotive. Was it a locomotive or was the modified like truck or something?
It's like a locomotive with one car that it's towing. It is
Okay.
cobbled together. It's not a pristine, steam locomotive. But yeah, I think it is a locomotive, and it seems to be certainly its suspension and its wheels are set to go on train tracks. Unfortunately, the train tracks that it is stopped on here in Underworld continue out when they break through a wall for miles and miles across the desert in remarkably good repair, I have to say, if this hasn't been used for a decade or more. But instead of a highway battle, we get a railroad battle. Because once Max has disrupted the energy supply, anti-entity inner people realize what's going on, and they, with their methane-powered turbine vehicles, race to catch up with the train and get Master back.
Someone had welded large steel plates onto Thomas's frame. He wasn't sure what to think of this. But yeah, the railroad battle is wild because this grand chase where there's only forward for our heroes, but all the vehicles are coming in from the other sides. It's very much another take on the tanker battle from the second movie.
Yes. Yeah, it's the same kind of climactic final act.
And it's another one of those points where that similarity becomes notable in is this the same tale being told again? Is this a different story? There's a bit of question there in the mythology and fable aspect.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain echoes there with it being about an energy supply and things like that. You can almost see how some of the Arthurian stories, it's clearly not the same story, but there are similar themes that are being hit or similar story beats that are being pulled in.
It's definitely it's exactly that kind of thing.
Right.
But I will say this one has a lot of back and forth, but not a lot of memorable moments for me.
No. Most of the interesting moments aren't the maneuvering of the vehicles and the vehicle to vehicle combat that's so important in the Road Warrior. Instead, a lot of it is just what's happening on this tiny train and people boarding the train to try to grab Master, who has found a little suit and hat and put them on. And I almost get the impression that the train car there might have been where Master lived, so he kind of knew what was there.
I also get the impression with the positioning and everything else, it almost feels like Bartertown was forming and this train rolled into town with this conductor and set up its underground. And it's like he arrived on his train and set up Underworld, and Bartertown was growing and formed more on top of it. And the two of them were fused in that way. Because of that, he lived in that train. It has his stuff. He knows how to run it aspect.
That makes sense. And he added some lights to Bartertown, and people started wondering, oh, those are cool. Where do I get some of those? And there he gets more and more power.
Yeah. What he arrived and traded at Bartertown was Underworld.
Right.
But now Underworld is leaving. But yeah, he's got his little suit and everything. But it's not like the train tracks go on forever.
No. They do eventually end. And where they end
is the start of the movie.
Yes. They're straight, but they're circular. Because they lead to the headquarters of the pilot and Pilot Junior.
Yes.
Who are trying to stick up the train.
And then realize quickly that's a bad idea.
Right, because they see who's chasing the train.
Yeah. Dive out of the way, get out of there.
So Max forcibly recruits the pilot to take all the kids and initially their stuff, but then they can't. They have too much weight, so they have to start getting rid of stuff. And They still don't have enough runway. They don't have enough space to take off before they would crash into the pursuers in the cars.
So Max, hops in his vehicle and makes a path.
Right. Plays chicken with the pursuit vehicles and barely manages to clear enough space for the plane to take off.
And in this one little moment, Max actually fulfills the prophecy of Captain Walker. This man who arrived, who got them all on a plane and flew them off to a grand city. And we watch Auntie Entity just see Max and what he's done and leave him.
Right.
Just respectfully leave him be.
She has this tiny speech at the end there, which echoes how she reacted to Max when she first saw him. And at first, back in Bartertown at the beginning of the movie, she just dismissed him. He's just a raggedy man. And at the end, he's saying, well, we're quite a pair, aren't we, raggedy man?
Yes.
And she sees something in him that she recognizes as the same kind of drive that led her to survive and to build Bartertown and try to reclaim something. But it's not like she's bringing him back to civilization, because she's just leaving him out there in the desert, and that's where people die.
Yeah, she goes off to go fix up and restart making Bartertown.
Yep, without Master.
Bartertown without Master now. But this is where we leave Max.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. We talked about this like him regaining, and he doesn't quite.
No, he's got nothing at the end. I guess he's got whatever few things were left in the pilot's lair.
Yeah.
Which would at least help him survive for a little while. But he doesn't have his vehicle, doesn't have his camel, doesn't have his monkey, doesn't have any of the stuff that he had at the beginning.
Yeah. But we do follow the kids.
Yes.
As they fly to the ruins of Sydney. The Australian movie is being specific about where it is now. I didn't expect that. But they arrive in the big city, and we get this years later as the culture and the society of the kids has grown to fill the abandoned and destroyed buildings.
And they're repeating the history, just like we saw them do back in the canyon. But now it's a bigger story, and it's about how they came to be where they are. And that's essentially the movie we've been watching, is them telling the history.
Yes.
Which echoes the way the structure of the Road Warrior is bookended by a grown feral kid telling the story.
Absolutely. And there's one last bit to the media aspect I want to point out.
Yeah.
We've seen all these things, but the final presentation is set up differently. It is rows of chairs watching one person on an elevated stage with nothing else.
Oh.
At the end of the story, all about the industry of TV and movie, the final presentation of narrative is a stage play.
It's live theater suddenly.
It's live theater.
And there is something ecclesiastical about it. It does seem also like a ritual.
Yes.
But you're right. It's a stage play.
It's a stage play. It ends saying going back to the beginning and doing this fresh thing is a stage play. And I love that aspect.
Now, here's a question.
Yes.
The movie is not clear about this, but the only people who got on that plane were the kids who survived, from among those who were ornery enough and focused enough to disregard what Max told them to do and stay put. Did they have the pilot go back to the canyon to get all the other kids? I'd like to think so, just so they would have more kids to start this city.
I would like to think so as well. And part of what they say in that final story is that they light beacons across the city that Max or any other travelers can find their way.
You get the impression that other people have found the city, and this is becoming another kind of new society, like Bartertown was, but built on different lines and with different priorities. But yeah, they're keeping this lit for everybody, but the person they're really keeping these lights lit for is Max, who never shows up, but they keep the lights on for him.
Absolutely. So I like to think that they did send back to get them, but I also could imagine them not.
Yeah.
Because they know that the kids who stayed can still have a good life there.
That's true. That is true.
And there's a bit of a, is it better for us all to be together, or is it better to hedge our bet and know that there is another group out there that is thriving as well, and it gives us better chances if we are both separate and able to thrive. And maybe if something goes wrong, the other one is still around.
Oh,
So there's a question there.
Maybe there's a trade route between the city and the canyon.
Exactly.
And
who knows?
The city can provide metal and materials and other things that are useful to the people who have chosen to live in the canyon. The canyon can help provide water and food for those who've chosen to live in the city. A lot of possibilities. I like the fact that they don't feel the need to make all that clear. They can be ambiguous about it.
Oh, yeah.
But I think we might be heading towards our final questions here.
I think we are. I'm going to say one last thing that I learned only after watching, and it made it a little more sad and sentimental. I realized there's a lot of this movie that was being worked on and thought of and written well before what happened here.
Right.
But the fact that a major part of this story is a bunch of people waiting and having this hope and admiration for someone after the crash of their vehicle hits even harder, knowing that this is the first film without producer Byron Kennedy, who died in a helicopter crash 2 years earlier. And so there's this little bit of that reverence and mourning for this captain that is gone and the crashed plane, that between that and the movie being for Byron in the credits roll, it has that little bit of an extra pang, and I want to acknowledge that because I think it did have impact on the way the story got told.
Yeah, that is important. You know, Kennedy's contributions to idea of Mad Max and creating the character, creating the story, it's hard to overestimate those. And to have him lost from this, it was a big blow, I'm sure.
Yes.
So, well, stay tuned for our final questions about Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. But in the meantime, if you like the IMM project, you should go to immproject.com. You can find our contact page if you want to get in touch with us by Discord, by email, by actual postal mail. You'll find all of our back episodes. If you want more and you want to support the IMM project, you can go to our Patreon and get additional audio content as well as support us, or just follow us free on Patreon to keep track of what's happening with us. And you can also go to our shop if you want strange and nerdy t-shirts, coffee mugs, notebooks, not only the IMMP logo, but also strange little inside jokes.
You want an excellent other high concept way to fight your enemies and prove superiority? You like Thunderdome? Try Kosho.
Oh, yes, indeed.
We've got Kosho merch.
And all of that is at immproject.com. And Ian, where can people find you?
I can be found as Item Crafting, be that at itemcrafting.com or Item Crafting Live on Twitch.
And you can find me at bymatthewporter.com. You'll find links to whatever I'm doing online. And that includes my YouTube page, where there or at drafthousedairy.com, you'll find the Draft House Diary, which is where I document every single one of my visits to an Alamo Draft House cinema anywhere in the country. So, final questions for Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. First, screen or no screen?
I'm going to say screen. This is a good movie, but it's also a movie that I know can be a little much at times.
Yes.
So this is a screen, but it is a are you ready for it kind of screen.
Yeah, I say screen, but it's not as strong a recommendation as it is for me on those first two movies. The first two movies, there's something raw, there's something immediate, there's something so different about them. And Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, it's an 80s Hollywood movie in ways that the other ones weren't. It's not a bad 80s Hollywood movie. If you like 80s Hollywood adventure movies, yeah, it's worth a screen.
Yeah.
And that brings the next question: revive, reboot, or rest in peace?
Well, let's acknowledge the Mad Max franchise from here. It did continue.
And we will be talking about that on a Patreon bonus.
Exactly. So it has continued, but I guess the question is, like, the specifics of Thunderdome. What would we want to see? And I don't know. I could see something being made of like the Bartertown story and like the Bartertown underworld when they're early and they're forming.
Oh, so a prequel about
A
Bartertown?
prequel about Bartertown. I could see a story of later Bartertown when it's back and running and it's big and grand. I could maybe see things about like the Sydney colony or the Oasis, but I kind of don't think we need it. I think Thunderdome has properly leached into popular culture all over, and it can kind of be allowed to rest in peace. I don't have much I can go. I don't even have one of my really weird, wild spin-offs that I try to think up for things. No. And I also do not think you could remake this. Like,
No, no.
no amount of attempt could imply a world where water is so scarce but hairspray is apparently so plentiful as this movie does,
Yep.
being made in the 80s about what it is.
Yeah, I would say rest in peace as well. I don't see, in some ways, this is one of the terminal points for the Mad Max franchise, which is it goes from this weird little indie movie into a big Hollywood production.
Yes.
There's nowhere it has to go from there, and no reason to do it. So I would say rest in peace.
Yeah, it's a rest in peace.
But as you acknowledged, it did not rest in peace.
No.
So we'll be talking about what comes next over on Patreon.
Yes.
But for now, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Inter-Millennium Media Project podcast. We really appreciate it. And we will be back in a couple of weeks with more tales. What's that?
Who runs Podcast Town? Who runs Podcast Town?
We'll be back
We've
in a
done
couple
our
of
road
weeks
trip.
with something. We'll have to wait and see what that is.
Absolutely. Yes.
But until then, thanks very much for being here with us.
And in the meantime, go find something new to watch.